What's up, YouTube? In today's video, we're going to be looking at the builder pattern. Now, there are multiple builder patterns, as one would expect in the software field. This builder pattern is not the pattern that is talked about in the Golf book, which is a creational pattern in the Golf book. This is also creational, of course, it's builder, but it's different. I'm not sure why they call it a builder, but it is what it is. So just to be sure, it's not the builder pattern that's spoken about or talked about in the Golf book. This is the builder pattern that, and I guess you'll see when I show you. I don't know how else to explain it. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the builder pattern, but primarily the when, why, and where we should use the builder pattern. I'm not a big fan of this pattern, I should say. I have a love-hate relationship with this pattern. So I use it for unit testing purposes, but never in production. So my recommendation is to not use the builder pattern in production code, but certainly use it for testing. And you'll see why there's a benefit to using the builder pattern in testing, but not in production code. So now, I don't know who you are, but I should tell you this. I have a particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you use the builder pattern in production code, I will look for you. I will find you, and I will kill you. If you know what this is, what I just said, leave a comment in the comments below. This was all fun, but I'm sure those who know what I just said will get a kick out of that. Okay, so I have a love-hate relationship with the builder pattern. I don't recommend using it in production code, but if you do, well, I won't repeat myself. So having said that and that out of the way, you know how I feel. So before I can get deep, I want to explain to you the problem or the requirement and the solution. So in order to understand the problem, I'm going to show you some code. All this code will be available to you on my GitHub. I'll put a link in the show notes below. The code that you see there will be completed code, whereas over here, what I want to do is go through the reasoning and the sort of the process of designing this builder. We go through different iterations very quickly, so I don't spend a whole time trying to explain the whole thing of building out an entire builder, but I sort of give you the different parts and pieces and the progression of sort of getting from nothing to the final builder that you will see in the source code that I put up on my GitHub. I think that's a valuable exercise for those of you who are trying to understand design or get better at design or just, want to have another perspective on things. This is my perspective, how I get from A to B. And I suggest that people, even those who are experienced, seasoned designers, should go through that process anyways, because I found, even though I can do this mental exercise in my head and arrive at a solution, because of experience, I still go through that process as if I've never done it before. And you'll be surprised what kinds of things you experience while you're going through this process of doing the code, writing the code, even though you know that's not what you want. Kind of progressing through that process as if you were just starting out designing, and you'll be surprised. There are a lot of things you will learn, a lot of things you will experience, if you will, and then it might alter your end game. It might alter the end result, right? So allow yourself to re-experience that evolution, even though you're an experienced designer, because that's key. The key is, if you've evolved in a certain way for over the last, 10, 15 years, you never get yourself a chance to evolve in a slightly different way. Right? The gene pool has changed, so the evolution should change. That makes sense. Anyway, so I'm going to explain the problem. I'm going to explain the requirement, if you will. Like, here's the problem, but this is what I would like. And then we look at the different solutions, and finally, you'll see the code, the final code in the source code for the GitHub. So if you want to just look at the source code, go right ahead. I won't be disappointed. I would be. I spent a lot of time, working on these videos and writing all the source code. So no, but go right ahead. Those who want to stick around and learn, let's get started here. All right. So the step one is to show you this is the application's config file, apps settings.json file, and we're mainly interested in this section, the device service section, but also the app settings, the HTTP proxy. So the basic idea is that I have a configuration provider in my system that will effectively read this stuff, these sections, the app settings and the device settings, do a bunch of validations for what is required within the settings here. And if all is okay, then output the device settings, service settings. So I'll show you that, the configuration provider here. And so if you look at also let me just introduce to you the solution. So those who are looking at the source code here. All right. So that's the solution. The domain layer is a .NET 2.0 standard library library project. And all the production code is in here. And we're really concerned with this configuration providers part. And of course, the models, which are under the manage. So the configuration provider is here. It's got a bunch of other models and validators within the configuration provider. And the basic models are the device service settings and the device. So over here, look at the configuration provider. You'll see it has this one method here. Get device service settings that returns to us a device service settings class. And this device service settings class is nothing but our domain model. So that's the class. And as you can see, it is an immutable class. All the properties are get onlys, and it asks for all the information in the one and only constructor of this class. So you cannot construct this class with some things that are not there, not present. Of course, you can provide nulls and all that, but that's not the point really. The point is that you have to construct this class instance by providing it with everything, right? Okay, then it has a collection of devices, and the device class is also an immutable class. As you can see, there's 3 properties here, and it asks for these 3 in the constructor, and that's the only constructor you have. So the only way to construct these 2 classes, which are domain models, is through the one and only constructor, right? Okay, so if you got that, so imagine testing the configuration provider. It's got this one method that gives you back device service settings class. In order to test that configuration provider, because of the fact that there's so many settings in the config file, in that JSON file, you got to test for the different scenarios. What if this is missing? What if that's not correct? What if the URL doesn't have a / at the end, and on and on and on. There's so many scenarios that you will need to test. Okay, now the way I'm testing this configuration provider is essentially by using the device settings class. So I'm using this device settings class, if you will. And in my test scenarios, for every method when I want to arrange for a scenario, I would like to set up a device instance. So not the device, I meant the device service settings class, the parent class. I would like to set up an instance of this with different kinds of values for these different properties, including the device itself, which is the child class here, so that I can set up the different scenarios. And then this device service settings class, I can take that and produce the sort of the JSON equivalent of that, and somehow provide that to my configuration provider as if it were a file, an app settings file. And so then I can produce the test, right? So the arrangement of the test is really what I'm sort of getting at. I would like to arrange for an instance of this guy to have different properties. Some, like, maybe there's only a base URL, but I don't care for the other properties, but I'm concerned mainly with the base URL scenario, if you will. And so the test scenario I'm interested in this particular test is, does the base URL end with a / or not? I don't care for the other stuff. I want the other stuff to be there and it should be valid, but I don't really want to concern myself when I'm arranging for this in the test. I'm only arranging for the base URL part. Or maybe it's the base URL and the HTTP proxy and nothing else, and so on and so forth, right? So there's so many scenarios. And rather than having to construct an instance of this guy, and I have to keep instantiating this instance with all of these properties, and when the device has a bunch of properties here, I don't want to concern myself at the time of doing the testing with all the nuances of all these properties. I would like a simpler way to create an instance of one of these guys where I could tell you, hey, I want to create an instance of a device server settings. I would like the base URL to be this, and everything else, just go ahead and produce something randomly, right? Or I want the base URL to be this, and I want the HTTP proxy URL to be a null, and everything else, just do what you need to do, right? As regards the devices collection here, make sure it's valid. And of course, from a configuration standpoint, there's a rule in the configuration part that says there must be at least one device. And so when it does this stuff randomly in the devices collection, not only does the device have valid random properties, there's at least one, right? So I'm hoping you get the idea there. At the time of doing the test arrangement, I'm trying to arrange for a certain scenario. I want to be concerned with just those properties that matter. And everything else, somebody should handle and take care of. So they should know what I'm interested in, and then they should do everything else, right? So I'm getting the opportunity to decide which properties need to have what values. And for all the other ones I don't care about, it needs to do the right thing, whatever the right thing is. Make sense? All right. Hopefully that does make sense. So I'm going to use the builder pattern, which is a console application. There are a bunch of tests here that you'll get in the source code, but essentially I'm now just working on this console application here. So in the console application is referencing the domain list. So it has access to all the classes in this library project here. All right. Okay. Okay. So in the program CS here, what I would like to do is, for example, I'd like to have a device service setting. For now, let's just say it's like that, right? And I'd like to construct this thing with various values, but really I want to kind of not be concerned with all the other values, right? I want to just be and then here I'll just do that. Okay. So how do I build this guy, the instance of this, where I don't have to keep providing? Remember, this is also a collection of devices. This could get pretty unwieldy or unnecessarily cluttered in every test. And there are, if you can imagine with the configuration provider, with that one method, there are at least 20 scenarios. Can you imagine having to clutter all of the test methods with the same thing, but with slight different variances? Sometimes you want to work with the base URL, sometimes you want to work with the HTTP proxy, and so on and so forth, right? So that's quite painful. So the builder pattern is used during testing in a certain specific way, where you say, okay, I want the builder is going to give me an instance of, in this case, the device service settings class. But I've told the builder what I would like to set the base URL to this and set the HTTP proxy URL to that. And the build method will then build all the other properties as well, right? The random values or properties that I didn't specify. So the code that you will see in your test is just the parts that matter, right? That's kind of like what I'm trying to do here. Now, the simple way to say is have a constructor with all those, not constructor necessarily, but at least in the builder. So let's say we have a builder class here, device service settings builder, right? Like that. Let's declare this. We have a builder class that has a constructor that takes n number of these properties that are required here, but they're all optional, right? And you can get fairly far with that. But the problem is that with the defaults, you don't know if you wanted the default or do you just not care, right? I mean, let's say the default of a string is a null. And then this logic in the builder would say, if you didn't set this property, this is the default value, then randomize it, right? That's the point, because you need a value. But if you didn't specify the value you wanted, then the builder will randomize the value and give you one, make one for you. But what if you want to set it to null? How would you say, I wanted it to be null? Right? There's no way to actually say that. So you don't get that 3-state scenario. The first state is you set it to a certain value you wanted. Second state is the random value. So in case you didn't set the value, it should use the random value. But the way it's going to do that is if it's null, then use the random value. And the third state is I want it to be null. How do I tell you that I want it to be null? Right? That's the rub there. So the first cut would necessarily, I think for the most part, most people will say, okay, let me just provide this method called build, let's say, that takes those, in this case, the 4 arguments. And if any one of them is null, I'll use a randomized value. If not, I'll use the value you specified in the method itself, in the build method's argument set, right? So I'm going to skip that step because that's kind of the most obvious one. So now the way I'm designing classes or anything in the programming will be from the usage perspective. So I know this thing needs to be giving. So let's just define a build method that returns a device service settings. And the method is called build. For now, it's just got that, and it should return. Actually, it should be returning the build method should be returning itself. So return this. Sorry, the build method should be returning a device service settings. My mistake. Okay. So what I'd like to do is something like that. So dot build, right? And for that. So now this gives me an instance of that. And I don't need the constructor values here. Let me just move this here. Okay, makes sense. So from a user standpoint, I would like to be able to do something like that. It gives me back a device service settings, and I can then use that. So let's imagine this to be the range of my test. And then this is the act, and then there's an assert, right? So I want my range to look kind of like this. Now, if I did that, the expectation would be that I get all those properties. Property is a valid device service settings class, and of course the devices collection. Everything about it is valid, but I didn't control anything, any properties. It's completely random. Everything is totally random, right? So let's just build that portion so we know what we understand what we are doing there. So here, I will just say in the build, I will return a new device service settings and get the base URL. So we're saying if, for example, if you did not set the value, then do this, else do that, right? But for now, since we don't have that, let's say we have a random. Okay, for now, I'll just use the random data generator to give me a base URL. So there's a class I have here in this project as well as in the testing projects itself. So you can just use that. So this is the random URL for the access token. And again, use the random data generator dot access token for that. And then HTTP proxy. So random data generator dot just URL. I guess, yeah. And I can give it some sort of a subdomain. So I'll just say, proxy. This all is relevant. Basically, just think of this as just random data, right? And for the devices collection, I've just written a method here. So let's just bring that in. Essentially what this is going to do is it's going to produce a random number of devices, right? And again, it's using the random data generator to produce the different properties for each of that, but it also determines randomly or a random set of the number of devices to create. So I'll just use that here. So I'm getting a random collection of devices as well. Okay, so that's that. So far, not too complicated, but it does what it does. So at this point, when I run this application, it's certainly going to give me an instance of a valid instance of device service settings, but I never got a shot at determining like what I want the properties to be. But let's make sure that this runs and then we take it from there, right? So everything's going to be random, right? It's all random. I don't know if you guys can see that. If you can't, then I'll just up the font size here. I don't know, 28. Let's try 28. Is that good? Yeah, that's bigger than the code behind. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So that's the base URL. That's the name of the property. That's the value. That's the access token property name. That's the value. That's the HTTP proxy property name. That's the value. And then for the devices collection, this is one device where identifier is this. That's the value of the identifier. Then this type, that's the value. OTA key, and that's the value. And then there's 4 of those. All right. So that's what it is. Random. If I run this again, it's just going to be a different set. I'm pretty sure you didn't remember what the previous ones were. But it's random. Each time it's coming back random. But it's a valid device server settings in the sense that it's to the extent that it needs to be valid, right? Now, one of the things we have here, a rule that we have, for example, is I want to make sure that the configuration provider, we have this requirement. If the base URL property does not end with a /, the configuration provider should, rather than complain saying, hey, you didn't give me the base URL correctly, it'll fix it and return to you a fixed version of the base URL, right? So by the time you call the configuration provider, that base URL should always have a / at the end, irrespective of what the setting in the config file itself was, which means I, at the time of testing, would like to set this base URL to specific values to produce the scenario so I can do the testing. Hopefully this is all making sense. All right. So which means I would like to be able to set the base URL to something, right? So I guess rather than fighting this, I should probably just put it there. So what would I do here? I could say, well, what if this class itself had a base URL property? And I would say, or a method, sorry, and I gave it the value. So let's say this is my base URL, just as that. If I could do that and then do a build, how will that help? Let's try that. So here what I'm saying is there's another method, public, that is a void returning. That's called base URL. The method is called base URL. I know that's going to be confusing since in the other case it's the property. And then when I do the build, somehow it says, hey, did you call this method? And if you did, maybe you should use the value that you provided here, right? So let's say we have a private member here called base URL. And here we just say base URL is equal to base URL, right? And then here we could say if, base URL is not null, then use that, else do that. Make sense? So let's just try this out simply here. So basically what I'm doing is, and this needs to return. What does it need to return? It needs to return one of those guys again. So again, just return this again, right? So that way you can chain it fluent. Needs to return one of these. Builder. Okay. So last time without doing this, the base URL was random, which is fine. It was valid. But now I want to set it to this. And of course, we're not using the configuration provider, but if the configuration provider saw this base URL in the config file, it would return it with that /. But we don't need to test that part. We want to just make sure that we can set up a device server settings exactly the way we want before we hand it over. Convert that to JSON and for our testing purposes. All right. So we want to just make sure we have full control over the construction of a device server settings class in all aspects, yet not have to worry about all the stuff we're not concerned about at the time of a certain specific test or certain scenario. You want to just be showing or writing the code that matters for that scenario. All right. So let's check this out. See that this works. So as you can see here, because I said it, it's there, everything else is random. So this would work. And you say, yeah, sure, that's pretty cool. We can just add different methods here as per remember, this is the builder. You're adding these methods on the device server settings builder, which means the server settings builder has to have the same set of methods that mimic the properties of the device server settings. It's not bad. Right, but it feels a little weird, and there's this synchronization you got to do. And of course, you can't. The builder is building the device server settings, so it has to gyrate every time you gyrate in the device server settings. So it's not like it can't, right? But does it make sense to convert a property to a method when you know it to be a property? The confusion will be that you're used to using the configuration provider's the device settings as properties, the base URL, sorry, as a property of the device server settings. And you're going to look at, well, this is a method now. So when do I use a property, when I use a method, right? So you don't want to get confused with that. But it's a valid option. So this is like the version 1, the poor man, the simple way of getting there. It's doable, nothing wrong with it, but it's not quite ideal. Okay, so then the next option is I'm going to say, well, how would I like this thing to be? Right? Like before I do the build is fine. And there's a logic here that's sort of kind of, how we want it, as in the idea is very clear. If you set it, use that value. If not, randomize it. Right? And that applies to everything. If you set it, use it. So this part is okay, but the question is if you set it and how do we set it? That's the rub. So we're going to be exploring more of that. So I'm going to remove this now, back to just the build method here. All right. So what I would like is maybe something like that. So I'm going to work from the angle of how I would like to consume this builder. So typically, most times when you're designing classes or the method signature of classes or systems even, you design it from the perspective of the user. How would I like to use it? I want to make that experience a good experience, the usage aspect. So I'm going to work from that perspective rather than the guy building or designing the class, right? So I would like to say something like set. And maybe there's a lambda. So do something like that. Oops, what the heck? Okay. And let's say if I could do something like base URL, right? And if that base URL, I could set it to, my base URL, let's say. So something like this. If I could say that I would like this to occur. So what would that be? What is this? This is a lambda. This X would have to be the device server settings class. But if we did that, let's just try it. So you understand. Now I'm going through this. So this will be public. It's going to return a builder, right? This method is called set. And then at the end of all of this, it's going to return this. All right. Okay. So now here, what is this argument? We're saying it's a action. So this will be an action, right? We'll say this is an action that takes a device service settings class as a argument, right? Like that. And let's call it for now, we just call it action. I can't think of something good. Okay. So now, because we are saying this is a device server settings, so X becomes a device server settings, that we can actually see all the properties of the device server settings, access token, base URL. This is pretty cool, right? In many ways, this is like what we would love to see, is that we get an X and then we automatically get the kind of the compile time help. We can't pick anything that's not valid, right? However, these properties are not writable. They get only properties. This class is immutable. So it's complaining here saying that the base URL cannot be assigned to, it is read only. All right. So, man, if you could just do that, right? That would be so cool. Okay. So the other option is you could say, okay, well, this is not a device service settings class. It's actually the builder. And we're back to kind of square one, where we are now saying, okay, well, at least it's properties on the builder. Right? So I'm just going to not go through the process, but I'll do that for the sake of this simple base URL. It's just a public member, and you can see it actually works. Right? There's no complaints here. So this property now is on the builder, right? And so you're seeing the build method and all. So this is, well, it's not the best, but it's okay, right? But again, the synchronization of the properties and all that. But then the question is, okay, so if I set the property, certainly I set it. But if I didn't set it, how do you know I intended it to be null, or do you want to randomize it? That's again the question. So you're back to that situation where, I'll give you an example if you don't understand what I'm saying. So let's say if I don't set the base URL, right? So let's do this. If I don't set the base URL, and I run this application. Oops, should probably take care of all the. Oh, okay. Yeah, so here we'll have to do something like that. Just so same thing, right? But it's saying the base URL is not null. If it's not null, use it. Otherwise, use that. So if it's null, use the random. And that's kind of like what I want to show you here. And so if I don't set it, then it's randomizing it, right? However, if I do set it, then it'll use what I set, which is, no, it didn't. Oh, that's because I didn't set the value here. So here base URL is equal to, oh, that's an action. So we have to call the action. Yeah, okay, that's better. We have to call this action and we have to provide it with this. It's a property on itself, okay? Now this might be confusing, but basically, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a property. I'm going to write this property out completely so we can put some breakpoints here. Actually for now, let's do this. I'll just do, this is the get and this is the set. Okay, so what's actually happening? Let's put a breakpoint here and put a breakpoint here. I'll put a breakpoint on these two, all right? Okay, and then I'm going to run this application. So because I'm passing it itself and I'm saying over here, I said I want to set, it doesn't look like that, but that's what I'm saying. I want to set this property to that, right? So this is the delegate where the first argument is the device settings. If you're not familiar with delegates, I suggest looking at my video on delegates. I've got 2 of them, but look at the one I put a link to over here. They're important, but you're not going to get any of this stuff without this delegates thing. All right. So make sure you look at that. Make sure also you look at the configuration provider video. I'll put a link to that. It's up here as well. And then come back to watch this. All right. So this action is saying what exactly? Right? If the action is really saying, watch. Here. So that has resulted in setting the base URL. Right? And then it comes back. So by writing this code here, what we have achieved is we have achieved this action, which is set the base URL to this value. If I look at the value right now, it's going to say my base URL. Let me zoom in here. Right, can you read that? My base URL. That's the value of it. All right. So if you're confused, that's what's going on. And then over here, of course, it's getting the value. When I'm trying to read it, it's trying to get the value. All right. So this is a get set property. So the one issue we have here with this scenario is, or this design, is that we need that 3-state thing. If we might want to set the value to null. We might not care, so you want it to be random, and you might want to set the value to something. So there's these 3 states, if you will. Currently, we only can support the 2, which is if we set it, we know we set it. If you didn't, and it's null, then randomize it. But what if we set it to null? We don't know that part. Right? So there's another option around that, which is, let's say in the setter, now we're going to have to implement this property, the full property. Behind the scenes, the compiler actually is doing this for us. It's got a backing field that it produces for us because it is a cryptic name. But then in the getter, we are saying return this backing field like that. Right, in the setter, we are saying set the backing field to the value that we get in the property. So this was how you define a property setter and getter in C#, but we do it the shortcut way. And now, what's this complaining about? Auto property. Okay, because this is exactly how it would be for auto property. But what I would like is anytime I set the property, what if I could do something like this? What if I said, this was a bool, and I said base URL is set. And then in the setter, I say base URL set is equal to true. And now what I could do is, rather than that, I could say if base URL is set, right, then use the base URL. So then use the property. but if it's not, then randomize it, right? So now we get the third state option, which is we can say is this, we can set it to this, we know that's working. If we set it to null, it won't randomize it, right? So let's try that. So now we're able to set it to null, right? It's not randomizing it because it knows we've set the property, but we've set it to null, right? So by a sort of intercepting the setting method to set a flag here, and then using the flag here. So now there's a lot to like about this, and there's some stuff to not like about it. The basic idea is, again, that you're now, the builder is kind of looking like a device server settings. It's got the same properties, except it's got the other method called build. And, there's nothing wrong with this idea. You don't have to be so strict about, how you would like to use it. But you're getting closer, right? You're getting a little closer to where you want to be. So, ready for the next step? Okay, now this next step is going to be, it's a little kind of mind-bending, right? So we are going to be talking about expressions. Expressions are meta programming. If reflections are meta programming, then expressions are meta programming. So they're one step kind of more meta than reflection, and you see what it is. So rather than explain to you what expressions are, I'll just show you. Hopefully that'll help you understand conceptually what it is, and you can play with it some more on your own and see if you understand it. But for reflection related things and for expression related things, I don't know who you are, but let me tell you, I have a particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you use reflection or expressions in production code, I will look for you. I will find you. And you know the rest. All right, so back. So this is not exactly, but we're kind of close. And we have a delegate here, which is an action. And now, so back to the drawing board, if you will. We don't want that. And let's worry about that, but let's also leave this around. Let's leave this for now. It won't compile. Okay, how would I like to see this? I think what I would like is something like that. Okay, so what I'm saying is I want this to be the property, not the I don't want the value. I want to know what property is being used here, right? And then this is the value I would like to set it to. So either it's null or it's, like that. So that's what I would like. I don't know what this thing is complaining about here. Okay. No, it doesn't know what this is. It's not correct. Okay. So that's what I would like. Okay. I would like to say I don't want the property value. I want the property itself. I want to know what property you put there. Right. So it's those who know reflection will say, oh, but that's reflection. Yeah. But listen, what's the data type for that lambda expression? Right. You're seeing this lambda returns to you a prop info. Yeah. Okay. How's this guy who's using your class going to be able to give you a prop info? You understand? I mean, it's doable, but that's a lot of work just to get a prop info for one of these properties to say, here's my thing I'm trying to set. I mean, by that point, the tests have already finished. This has to be simple. But this is exactly where expressions come in. All right? So let me show you. So here, I'm going to say this is an expression. By the way, expressions were introduced during the LINQ timeframe. So I think .C# 3.5. All right? That's when LINQ was introduced in the language. As it is meta, it's beautiful. I've used actually expressions in one of my systems. Well, it's too involved to explain, but the customer was like blown away with what we were able to do with that. But think of this, like this, an expression, and I'll show you the code. So in debug mode, so you'll see like what I'm talking about. When you have an expression, instance of an expression in your hand, you are able to query it It's like an abstract syntax tree. It's like a graph of information of every part, every curly dot period, the whole thing. It gives you that detail level of information, well, not all the dots and query, but it gives you the parts and pieces of the expression. And linked to SQL, which was the predecessor of Entity Framework, what we today know as Entity Framework, uses it, and so does Entity Framework. What it's doing really, both Entity Framework, anything that's an iQueryable is potentially, or also called a link provider, is essentially taking the expression and translating the expression to some other language. So link to SQL and EF are taking our C# expression, the where, the group by, the join, all of that, and converting that to a T-SQL or whatever SQL query that is executed on the server. It's not C# code that executes, right? But that expression gives enough information at runtime to help you reconstruct either the same expression or understand deeply what is it that the user was trying to do with that expression. Translate that to English. But that's what one of the things we did in this project I was talking about. Not only did we translate that to compiled assemblies, we translated that to English sentences as by way of documentation for the rules, so the salespeople could understand the rules that were in effect, if you will. So we would take that expression but translate that into English. The EF team and the link to SQL team take that C# query expression that has been ordered with the wires and the group bys and convert that to SQL or TSQL behind the scenes. That runs actually on the server, right? So anything that's an iQueryable, not an IEnumable, but iQueryable, is potentially a link provider and is potentially using expressions to translate what you're saying in the language to some other kind of language. You can take link and make calls to a web service, and a lot of the SDKs for Azure provide you with that link interface, if you will, to query for data on the service. So that's all done through expressions. All right, so back to this expression. So if this were an expression, what am I saying exactly? I'm saying that I want this to return to me that, so it gets that, that's now, this time it's a, the device settings. So it's an expression that's a func of something, right? So this expression here is actually a func of something that is a device settings, like that. And it takes, what is it returning? Right? It's returning that. So this is the device settings, X, so we see the base URL on that. And it's returning the kind of the thing here. So let's say it's just like a, T. What? T. And that. Okay. And then it also gets a value for what we want. Sorry. That's this part, the second part. And this takes a T like that. Okay. So we have an expression. Oh, and we also need here the argument name. Okay. So this is an expression that takes a func. The func has this as an argument coming into the function, and there's a T being returned. What's the T? The sort of the value, if you will. And then there's another T, which is the actual value we want to set. So we were saying here we would like to get access to not the value of the property, but the property, like what is it exactly? Like at the meta level, right? At the kind of the reflection level, where you set the prop info. So what's the property name? What's the property type? That sort of thing. And because this is a device server settings, we're seeing all the properties of the device server settings. So this doesn't feel dirty at all. As we add more properties to the device server settings, this all will automatically just show up here. But this is nothing but the device server settings, right? So we saved ourselves that headache or that having to sync up the builder with the device server settings. So to a large extent, that whole problem has been sorted out. Of course, it's not totally gone away because we have to, of course, build a thing here, and every method, every property is going to be, impacting our build method, but not this method. Okay, so let's look at what is this. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here. All right. And we'll see what the heck is going on here when we compile, when we build, run this application, debug this application. Oops, what did I miss? All right, so I need to, for now, just do that. Okay. Okay, so we are here. So this compiled. What the heck is this expression? Look at that. Let me zoom in here. You see that? It's actually showing you in the form of a string what you just wrote. Do you get that? That's pretty cool. It is telling you this is what I found. The actual kind of the expression, if you will. Right? Let's dig in a little bit deeper here. Okay, then we have the parameters. So you can look at the different parameters. Now this looks very reflection-y, right? It's as I said, it's meta. So the first parameter is called X, and it's 0, and it's the type is device server settings, which is fine. That's what you want. And the name or the node type of that specific node within the expression is that of a parameter, right? And so on. So it's very deep. But let's look at the body part here. And we got the body. It says this type is a member access. And guess what? Here is saying it's a base URL, the debug view. But if you look at the member, it then says this is, the name is a base URL. It's a property and it's a type string. So this is almost like the prop info, if you will, from a reflection standpoint. So as I said, expressions are meta. They're one step more removed, if you will, than reflection is. So but it's a lot of information. So let's see how we can use this information for our purposes then. So that expression is going back here. It's actually called the body is of type member access, right? So let's see if we can do this. What if we said this expression is nothing but a member access exception expression. Member expression. Okay. And then if that were the case, so this is actually the body. The member expression is the body. And then on that, once we have that, we can do the member dot name, which gives us the name of the property. The name of the property, which is that. Which one did we pick? And then that will give us the value. So we know which one we intended to set and to what. Looks like we are getting there. This should, if you can solve this puzzle, then we're home free, right? So here we have a property name. Let's just run this and see what is the value we're getting here, as a property name and what's going on there, and make sure we're on the right track. So I'm going to run this. So we set the property base URL. We're not setting, we're saying we're giving it this property. We're returning this property, if you will. And we're saying that value. So the property name here is base URL, as you can see, right? The value is my base URL. So let me just zoom in again. The value is my base URL, and the property name is base URL, which is exactly what we would expect, right? So now what do we do? Exactly. We can put this name in a dictionary, and the value as the key. Sorry, the name is the key and the value is the value in the dictionary. The dictionary will have to be a string object, right? Mapping. In the build method here, we could say if the value is, let's say, I'll just do conceptually, if it's in dictionary, then use the value that's in the dictionary, else random. And we get the 3-state option, because if it's in the dictionary and we set it to null, then it'll use that value. Or if you set it to some other value, it'll use the value anyways. But if it's not in the dictionary, it'll just use random. And there we have it. You want me to write the code out? Okay, let's do that quickly, just for the one property. All right. So here we'll do, it's a private read-only dictionary of string object. Let's call it properties to build. That's nothing but a new dictionary there. All right. And then here we'll say properties to build of property name as a value of value. All right, that's clear. And over here we'll say properties to build dot try get value. We say name of. We could basically what I want to do is this, right? Base URL. So I'll keep it for now. Let me just clean up a little. So this outvar base URL. So if that is true, then return base URL, which is the local variable here. And this is an object, so it'll have to be cast potentially to a string. I'll just randomize it. Okay, so that's what it'll be. Now, even this, you could, rather than sort of using strings here, you could say name of and we can say device server settings dot base URL. So this will actually make sure that in case we change this to something else, there'll be something else. If we remove this property entirely, this would be a compiler and never miss that issue. So let's test this out just to see if this works. So we are setting the value here. Let's to my base URL. We want to do a build. So this should be set to that value. If you set it to null, we should get a null. If you don't set it, it should be random. Let's go through those three. Okay, so it's been set here. All right, let's set this to, let's not set it. Let's try that first. So now it's random, as you can see here. It's got some value, which is random. But let's set it to null. And it's null. So we have all three, right? So now I hope this has been, you can understand this. Hope you're going to be using this stuff. There's some more to builders, really. This is not only the one way to do this or the one feature, if you will. There's a build, but I'll show you in the code that you're going to see in my GitHub. There are a few other methods that you'll use. So one of them would be, what if we want to build this thing that looks like just like another thing, except for a little change, right? So that's a feature we're going to get in C#9. They call it a factory, if you will. You know, you can give me an instance of this class that's immutable, but use this other class. And sort of give me a copy, except change one thing, right? So you can change one thing or two things and all that. So there'll be a feature in C# where you get that other thing. I'm going to show you the builder now that I have, that you will have access to from the code, and go through some of the features you're going to see there, explain that to you. And of course, then, you have free access to the code. I suggest look at that code and study it and use it and understand how to build one of your own. All right, let's look at that code, the builder code that you're going to get access to. It's in the test projects here. That's under the builders folder. All right, so this is pretty much what we had here in the test thing, right? We had the expression that's a delegate of type func device server settings of t, and the value also is a t. We did that. We put in a dictionary. Some methods have been cleaned up here, but basically it's the same idea, right? Now the build method does what we had here. The with method asks you for an instance of device server settings. And rather than using a random here, it's got the same logic, but if you haven't provided it, it'll use the value from the instance that you provided. So it's like the with. Build me one of these with one of those, and swap out. If I override it, then override it. If not, use what is there with the with. Right? So that's a very frequent thing, even for testing. It's very, very common. You don't want to know what the other value is. You say, whatever that thing is, I want exactly that thing, except just modify this one thing. That's the requirement you have very frequently. And then build with defaults, which is basically just give me an instance. Everything is the default values of everything. So it's like a nulled version of a thing. It's got no properties at all set. Right? Everything is validly null in that sense. That's what that is. So everything else is the same. It's just a little more refactored version of what we are playing with here. So it's a little cleaner. All the code on the GitHub repo is production quality code. So, it's not like I've not just slapped it together. So take a look at it. Maybe you learn a few things. There's a lot of other things to learn in that code. Configuration providers. If you don't know what the roles and responsibilities of that are, I have a video for that on my channel. I'll put a link to it over here. It's important to understand that. So this project that you'll see here implements the configuration provider in the way that you should have, and also has a test for it. It's not all the tests, but at least you got the set of tests and how I went about for the builder, how I use the builder in the tests. And if you want, you can extend that as well. The other cool feature in the code base here is the ability to give it our device settings, server settings class, and at test time, somehow provide the configuration provider with an in-memory JSON stream that is this serialized version of this device settings class. So you're able to arrange for that data, the so-called app settings file, which is not really a file, so that you can do your testing for the different scenarios. So if you're interested in knowing how to do that, I've got a few extension methods there that help with all of that. So that might be interesting for you, right? So, well, that brings us to the end of this video. And I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. I hope you learned a few things. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. And I'll see you. Hey, by the way, if you don't give me a like, and if you don't subscribe, right, exactly. So I want to repeat the whole dialogue again. I'll see you next time.